Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Optimizing Images for Export. So welcome today. So we're going to be talking sort of mostly about, or three things really, four things. Sharpening for export. So that's very important, something that is often got wrong. Sizing and cropping, how to sort of relate that and get that correct based on your outputs. Using variants for this process, and also how to create process recipes and save a bit of time as well. So if this is your first webinar, just to introduce me, my name's David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. And as usual, we have 60 minutes, but we'll try and get this wrapped up a bit quicker. Should be easier and a bit quicker to do within 45 minutes. I am recording this, so we will send you a recording. Don't worry about that. So you'll get a follow-up email sometime tomorrow. You're very welcome and encouraged to submit your questions at any time. The way you do that is look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, and you'll see the bottom section is called questions. Put a question in there and that will come straight through to me. And when you leave, hopefully not before the end, please answer the exit survey and then we know how we're doing. So let us get started. Just need to move a few things around. Just turn this off for a second. Alrighty. First things first, we're going to talk a tiny bit about sharpening, because sharpening is very important, certainly when you come to output, because quite often it's misunderstood that, yes, of course, if I make an image bigger, I might negatively impact the sharpness, but also if you make an image smaller, you're also going to negatively impact the sharpness. So it's important that we compensate for that as well when we output our images. Now there's kind of three stages, if you like, of sharpening. So there's something we're going to look at in a minute, the first stage, which is diffraction correction. Then you've got the sharpening that you're going to put on your image to bring it to an acceptable level. And then it's going to be sharpening for export as well. So three different stages. Now the diffraction part is sort of often misunderstood. So let's have a look at that. Now in the lens correction tool, you'll see here this checkbox called diffraction correction. Just going to grab the image with no adjustments. And we shall zoom in to 100%. And what diffraction correction does, it compensates for very small apertures. So as the aperture gets smaller and smaller, it can actually reduce the quality of light going through. Excuse me. And that will sort of have a softening effect on the image. So let's actually duplicate this image. We create another new variant, which is just like a virtual copy. And then I'll just select both so that they're both up side by side. And then on the top one, I'm going to turn on diffraction correction. Now, depending on the webinar broadcast, might be a little bit hard to see, but I'd try this on your, I'd try this on your own images so you can have a look. So diffraction correction on at the top, off at the bottom. Now, it's only worth doing this at small apertures. So depending on the lens, kind of, f16 and above, something like that. Below that, it's not going to have any positive benefit. There's also a penalty that if you have diffraction correction turned on, then it will lengthen the time it takes to process the image. But definitely worth having a look at your own images if you've got it. So now this image, which I stupidly shot at f1.8, bad David. If we turn on diffraction correction for this one, doesn't really make any difference. So really is for those small apertures. So that's the first stage. So now this webinar is about exporting for various different things. So let's start to talk about process recipes, which is in the second to last tool tab. So the whole point really of a process recipe is to bring sort of speed and consistency, because there is this option in Capture One of saying file, export images, like so, and then you can go into this dialog and choose whether you want TIFF, JPEG, and so on, right here. But that's inefficient, because if you then need a different format, you have to go back into this dialog, change all your parameters and so on. And let's say you want to export TIFF and JPEG at the same time, you can't do it with this dialog. So you have to go in, do your export, go back in again, change the parameters, export again, and so on. So it's very sort of inefficient to do it that way. So that's really the whole point of having these guys, the process recipes, is that it allows you to define different recipes for different exports. So my JPEG recipe, my TIFF recipe, and so on and so forth. So we're going to do 3 examples on just a single file, and then we have a look at a batch as well. So first of all, how to make a process recipe. So we just do a simple TIFF export. So in my process recipe tools, I'm going to say plus, and that will give me a new recipe. So let's say we just want to do something really simple, like export to a full size TIFF, like so. And really the title of the recipe is basically going to describe what it does. So this is a full size TIFF, and it's in Adobe RGB, and it's going to be 16-bit, for example. So that gives me an idea of what my recipe is going to do. And then in process recipe underneath, not recipes, this defines what that recipe does. So notice if I switch to this one, then the parameters change. So let's go back to this one I just made. I said it's going to be a TIFF. It's going to be 16-bit. The profile is Adobe RGB. And we don't want to do any scaling. We're going to come to that. It's just a full size like so. So that's very simply how to make the basics of a process recipe. I'm just going to delete some stuff we're going to do a bit later on. Okay. Alrighty. So now we come to the next tool, which is output location. So this defines when I start to process my images, where are they going to go? So destination, pictures. Now, if we want to change this, we just go in here, choose folder, let's pick pictures, and we set that as the output folder, for example. So whenever I start the processing off, that's where they're going to go. We're going to cover having sort of different and unique locations a bit later. Output naming, image name, that just uses this token, as we call it. We're going to look at more of those too. That just uses the name of the raw file, so the image name. Simple as that. And then process summary. I could actually fly this one out. Why not? We just sit it here. Output location, process summary like so. This basically shows me the summary of what my recipe is going to do, and it has the button to process, which is also in the file tab right here, like so. So now if I hit the process button, click, and then if we go to our output location, so I can click the arrow here, which is the fastest way to take me there, you can see there is our full-size TIFF file. So simple enough to make a recipe and get one image out like so. So now that's fine. But let's say we just use one of the recipes that was already here. So a JPEG like so. Let's process this one out. Go back to the Finder. Let's click on the arrow. Go back to the Finder. Okay, I've got the same one here, JPEG and TIFF. But I don't really know what they are. I don't know how they've been set up or anything like that. I can see this is pretty big. I can see this one is a bit smaller, but you're going to end up with a whole list of files here, which kind of isn't very useful and can be a bit confusing. So we can improve on that by going into the subfolder here in the output location tool. So this allows me to either manually type in a folder name, for example, California, like so, or we can use something called a token to automatically define that. So if we click on the square box here, this gives me a list of all the available tokens that we can use. And they pull from some kind of metadata from the camera, or dates, times, and various other things as well. So one very useful thing to do, if we filter this down to general, we can use this one, recipe name. So if I drag and drop this up here and say OK, this will create a folder based on the recipe name. So now if we use the process recipe that we made at the start, and to use a process recipe, make sure the box is ticked. So when I click process, it will use any that are ticked here, essentially. So now with recipe name in subfolder, if I say process, click on the little arrow, you can see we've now got a folder like so, which has the name of the recipe in use. So that makes things easier. And also, again, if you want to append the file name to reflect that as well, you could also do the same thing in output naming. So for example, if I start typing ahead, recipe, you see I've got two here, recipe format and recipe name. So you can have the whole recipe name, which might be a bit long, or we could just use the recipe format, for example. And you see it adds TIFF 16-bit to the end of the file name. Now, if you want to space these out, you can also cursor in between them. Then I could do a dash like that, so it just looks a bit neater. So if we process this again, hit the button, then you can see there it is. So the same thing. Oh, I hit process twice. So you can use just simple tokens like that just to help you keep track of the kind of export it is, whether that's making subfolders and also appending the name also in a similar way. So that's just some basic sort of recipe stuff. Now, if we want to process something for a purpose, this is where we get into, resizing the image to some extent, cropping a little bit different as well. So the next example, we're sort of up the ante a bit and talk a bit about sharpening too. And a familiar thing that we can use is making an export for Instagram. As photographers, we probably use Instagram a great deal. So how would we optimize the settings from Capture One to do that? Now, it doesn't have to be Instagram. If you're not an Instagram user, it doesn't matter. We can correlate this to any kind of export where we have to create an image of a certain size and quality, which is suitable for the medium it's going on. So in this case, that's Instagram, but of course it could be, a web page or something like that. So let us make a new recipe. And this one we're going to call Instagram, like so. Now we're going to have a JPEG, of course. And quality we're going to come back to. And then as we are going out to web, we're going to change the profile to sRGB. And this time the scale, there's no point blasting out a full-size JPEG because then Instagram's only going to downscale it. And then you lose the control about adding the sharpening that you need. So first of all, let's scale it down to the correct size for Instagram. Now there's a bit of conjecture over what this should be. I've found that doing it to 1080 reduces the quality somewhat. So I've found that the sort of sweet spot, and you can argue with me on this one, is 2048 pixels wide. That seems to give me a really nice quality of output. So we've got JPEG, we've got sRGB, and we're going to 2048 pixels across. Now that's reducing this image quite somewhat because this is from a A7R3, and you can see here in the scale that it's going to need to reduce the image to 27% to make it 20 by 48 pixels across. Now that's quite a heavy reduction, which is going to have a negative impact on the image quality and sharpness. So let's have a look at 100%. So that's how the image looks right now. It has had some edits and adjustments and so on. It's got the default sharpening in Capture One. But what I might do on the background, let's just add a bit more structure so it's nice and crispy. And then now, basically, I want to simulate what this recipe is going to do once it goes to Instagram, in this case, or resizing it to these number of pixels. So I'm viewing at 100%. So what I do now is when I click these spectacle icons on the toolbar, it's going to reduce it down. Let's hide the browser with a Command B. It's going to reduce it down and simulate what that process recipe is doing. So it's scaled it by 27%. And that's what it's going to look like. So now I can see that actually it's not quite as sharp or jumping off the screen as it could be. So if we go to the Adjustments tab, you'll see here we've got a tool that says Sharpening, no output sharpening. So if I go in here, I can say, let's add some output sharpening for screen. Now I can bump up this slider just a little bit. Too much, probably. Again, it might be hard for you to see exactly what's going on depending on your quality of screen share, but this is something you can easily eye in at home when you're working with Capture One at home. So I'm just going to bump this up a little bit. Now I've got the sharpness back from that 27% reduction. What I can also do, it will also simulate the JPEG quality. So if I go down to 0, then I get my JPEG artifact sneaking in, but then I can use this slider and we can also see how that affects the file size as well. So I can get a good balance between quality and file size. There's no benefit having it at 100%. So I'm going to go down to something around here. So that's got me a good balance between quality and file size as well. So smaller file size, of course, much better for uploading to any sort of web medium. So now by using the recipe proofing, we've now got a nice sharp export and so on for my specific image at 2048 pixels across. It's still going to go into a subfolder with that recipe name, and it's also going to append the file name as well. So if I hit process, click on that arrow here to go to the export, you can see Instagram like so, and there's my image, which is nicely resized and sharp. Perfect by that. Paul is saying, and this was a question that came up earlier, could you scale by file size? You can't, and there's a good reason for that, hang on, whoops, sorry, I turned the screen sharing off. And the reason for that is that if you scale by file size, you're going to vary the quality of your output, which you don't want to do because you've then lost control of how your output's going to look. Now, if compression was the same per image, then it wouldn't matter. But JPEG compression varies on image content. So, for example, Paul was saying, I've got a limit of 20 megabytes of size. I mean, that's a pretty massive, whopping great file. So you're much better off limiting your pixel width and adjusting the quality, because every single output you put out from Capture One, you're going to have the same image quality because your quality slider is going to be constant. If you let some variance of file size come in, then you actually lose control of the quality of your output. So we had this kind of issue the other week that's popped up in support, that someone was exporting from a very high resolution camera to do like image blending or stitching and so on. So they were pumping out very high resolution shots with the quality slider right down to get it under that limit. And of course, then the quality varied a great deal. So that's my reasoning behind it. So reduce pixels with a constant quality, and you'll probably find you're going to have a lot better consistency. John, I need to adjust resolution. No, I don't. There's absolutely no point touching the resolution when you're going to pixel dimensions. It will have no effect whatsoever. So resolution is very important when we are scaling for print output, which we'll see in the next one. But it will make absolutely zero difference here. I could put 1 billion DPI in here or 10 DPI, and it would make no difference to how it looks on Instagram. So it's a complete waste of time in changing out there, and for any web service as well. Let's see. Isn't Instagram optimal for squared crop? It used to be, but not anymore. You can now actually hit the button when you upload to not actually crop it square. But if you want square, then you could also crop to dimensions, which is what we're going to do next. Mac people, by the way, out there, there's a handy little app called Flume, this one here. So that when we process the image, so let's just do that again. I'm not logged into Flume here, but it will actually open up Flume. And this will actually allow you to post from the Mac as well, and add hashtags and all this kind of other stuff. Works really nice. Doesn't get you banned because it just mimics uploading from a cell phone, but it's a lot less hassle than uploading pictures to cloud storage or sending them to your phone and doing it from there. You can do it all from the desktop. Really, really nice. Okay, so that's exporting for a particular purpose. So what about if we need to do exact dimensions? And this is where variants come into play as well. Let's turn off proofing. So now, let's just kill that for a second. So now we've got my image here. It's got the crop that I want to have. This is my nice crop by eye, best composition and so on. But let's say I need to print out to A3 or some other dimensions for whatever reason. Now this doesn't necessarily fit into the proportions of A3, but I like this crop. I don't want to mess it up. So what I'm going to do is say image clone variant, like so. And this will give me a virtual copy. We're at number 5 now of this image like so. So now when I hit the crop tool, I can crop this quite happily, but I can still retain my original crop that I like by eye. So how do we go about cropping to specific dimensions? So let's make a new process recipe. And let's call this output to A3 size. Still can't type. And so now we go down to my process recipe. Say we're going to print, so let's have a TIFF file. We could, if you had your, if you were going to print to, your own inkjet or whatever, you could pick your output profile here as well. And now scale-wise, we're going to say dimensions in millimeters for A3. Sorry for you, those watching in the USA, but, principle's the same, inches, millimeters, whatever. So A3 is, oh God, what is A3? I need to Google it. Hang on. A3 dimensions. I can remember one, but not the other. A3 dimensions is 297. Thank you, Google. 297 by 420. Like so. So I got my dimensions in there. Did you see what happened as soon as I put 420 in? This guy turned red because it's incorrect. And it's also shown red in the process summary. So you might think, well, how on earth will I change this? Do I have to sneakily whatever do it? So I gave away my secret trick there. So you see, even though it's correct in one plane, it's incorrect in this plane. So would I have to then carefully change this and then try and manually get those numbers to light up, which is a bit of a faff, as you can tell. So there's a very easy trick in Capture One, which is in the crop tool. If you click and hold, you can say set my cropping aspect ratio to output, like so. So to output, now as soon as I touch the crop, 3, 2, 1, snap, it goes to exactly the right dimensions. And now even if I do my crop like this, we're still 420 by 297 and so on and so forth. So now I can crop superbly to my format without worrying about, first of all, ruining the crop I got from my original one up here, this one here. So I've got my separate image, which has my A3 crop, like so, or my separate variant, I should say. Now, same principle applies for proofing, and resolution is important here, John, because we need the resolution to scale to the correct dimensions. Now, whatever you're printing at, 300 dpi, 200 or whatever, let's just go to 40 for whatever reason. This will have an impact on the number of pixels that we need on each edge. So once again, we can do the same thing. If we go to 100%, fit screen, go to adjustments, and then we're going to have some sharpening for print, like so. And sharpening for print dialog looks a bit different because we've got the viewing distance. So you can do a percentage of diagonals. or you can do the viewing distance. So for example, if we had a really short or long viewing distance, like 2 meters, then the sharpening would get a bit stronger. If we had a smaller, let's turn on proofing like so. My mistake. So if we had like a short viewing distance, the sharpening gets a bit less. If we had a further viewing distance, then the sharpening gets greater. Like so. So for example, if we were viewing a portfolio print at viewing distance, depending how gorilla armed you were, around 50 centimeters, and that dials it in like so. So then you can quite accurately set this. Now I did some tests a while back with these settings, and I found the default of 80 actually worked really nicely at a viewing distance of 50. Now we all prefer different levels of sharpness, it's somewhat subjective and so on. So I would run your own test to see what you like. But I found the default amount at a few different distances worked out really, really nicely. A couple of you said, could you rename the variants? No, you can't rename the variants. They will have the same name. If you did rename the variant, then what should the file name be? That's one thing, a little conundrum to think about, because they share the file name, but you can't rename the variants. But what I tend to do, I use different color tags. So I know blue, for example, is for a particular output dimension. But the output sharpening for print works super, super nice as well. But do run your own tests just in case. So now let's hit the process button like so. Let's hit process. And then if we go to the file, you can see output to A3 size. It's got our TIFF. And the pixel dimensions here were, resolution. The dimensions here were calculated based on that resolution. So resolution is really important in this case. If I change this to 300 dpi, 300, and let's hit the button again. There we go. So this, the one we did just now, is 3969 pixels across. This one here is, oh, come on, Apple. There we go. Is 4961 pixels across. So when you're going to particular dimensions, resolution is really important. When you're going to pixel size, resolution makes no difference. It's basically metadata, but it doesn't make any difference to how the image looks on the web. So that's 3 different things we can do. A basic full-size TIFF, exporting for some kind of purpose like Instagram, and then exporting to specific dimensions. But what if we want to power up and do stuff on a batch, for example? So here we have a bunch of Camillas. So we've got 8 shots here. This equally could be 800, of course. And then we might want to export these in a number of different ways and manage that quite nicely. So first of all, let's just clean up this output folder. So it's empty. And right now, when we've been processing, everything has been going to a global location. So everything's been going to pictures. But process recipes can also have their own unique location, if you like. So let's make one with its unique location and combine that with the global location. So let's say this one, for example, we want to go to Dropbox. And I call this Dropbox client folder. And we do a bit more with tokens here as well. Now, what I've done for each of these images, if we look at the metadata, you can see they've got the copyright of the photographer who took them, Alex, and then I just made up some kind of job identifier here, Chanel, and the date they were shot. So a couple of things in metadata there, in job identifier and copyright notice, because every single metadata entry also has its own token. So what we're going to do for Dropbox, we're going to have a JPEG quick proof, because that's going to be super fast. So the quick proof basically uses the preview that was created when you first import into Capture One or shoot tethered into Capture One. It's going on the web, so we're going to do sRGB, and under File, instead of going to output location, so by default, you'll see output location is set here. That means Capture One will go straight down to this tool and say, okay, the image needs to go in this location. But we can override that and we can select a unique location for any process recipe. So this one, I'm going to target the top level of my Dropbox like so and choose that. Now, so I don't have to keep changing my process recipe, and this is the whole point, that you automate everything so you don't have to go in and keep fiddling with stuff. You use tokens so that the process recipe is created once and then you repurpose it lots of times without having to change it. So in this field here, subfolder, we're going to use the token which was job identifier like so. So it's going to go into my Dropbox at the top level and then drop into a folder of job identifier, whatever is in that metadata field like so. So this means when I use this recipe again for a different job, I don't have to go in and manually type a different folder. It'll just use the metadata that's present. Okay, so job identifier there. Let's also put a watermark on this image. So we go to watermark and we will say text. And again, text, I could manually type the photographer name in here. But again, that's inefficient. So let's just put up the copyright notice like so. And to help our client, that's a little bit big. So let's go into the fonts and change that to black first of all. Let's go black like so. And that's a little bit on the large size, so let's go down to something like 36. That's a bit better. And let's put the opacity up to 100. Grab the little hand tool here and let's move that where we want. And then we can also add another token, and we're going to have the image name because our client's a bit blind, and that will help them see the file name as well. And again, we can separate that with a little dash like so. So now we've got a nice little copyright up here, but it's also dynamic. So if we scroll through the images, you'll see the file name change like so. So again, that saves us having to do so. So we've got those images popping in there. Again, we could also add some output sharpening for screen, just so they're nice and crispy as well. Now, Alan says, well, why not just change the output location to Dropbox? Because that's going to affect all your process recipes. I want to run more than one process recipe at the same time. So I've got my client folder. I also want to have my sRGB for web running. So that's on the long edge, for example. And I also want to have a full-size TIFF, like so. So I've got two process recipes going to the global location and the Dropbox one going to a different location. So let's get these up on screen. So we've got the pictures folder, and let's also get a new window, and we got our Dropbox folder, like so, running out of space. You go up there, you go down here, like so, and let's now trigger these three at the same time and say process. So now we've got our full-size TIFFs going here. There we go. Oh, I've only got one selected, stupid David. Let's select all and say process and watch that again. So now we've got the TIFFs going in here. We've got the JPEGs popping in here as well. If we look in Chanel, we've got the quick proofs dumping in there as well. So remember, that folder was automatically created. So Alan, the reason why I didn't do that is because then we can be much more efficient. So that's going straight out to my Dropbox. I can right click here, copy the Dropbox link, send that off to my client or whatever, so they can download and so on and so forth. But it's often a question comes up that people do get tied in knots because they keep changing the output location, and then they get really frustrated when the process recipes all then follow that, when they expect the output location to be unique to the recipe. But this is a global location. The unique location comes up in here, basically. Can I export directly to Apple Photos? You might be able to just pick it up, open with Photos, and they might auto import. I haven't tried it. Could you do Google Drive instead of Dropbox? Yeah, of course you could. Definitely. No problem at all. How do you copy these to a second computer? Oh, remind me, and I'll show you at the end as well. And I want to show you another cool thing. So using Dropbox or Google Drive is just kind of a little bit antiquated because it doesn't give you that sort of interaction. It doesn't necessarily look nice and so on. So one thing you guys should definitely explore is if you go into Preferences and some of our Capture One plugins. So let's just bring up the web page. Prodibi. These guys are super awesome. They made this really nice plugin for Capture One. So if you go to prodibi.com, I'll just copy paste that in the chat so you can see that. You can go to Capture One plugin up here, download it. So I'll just get this out the way now. Download it, and then you just add the plugin down here, plus like so. And then you can browse for the plugin that you've just downloaded. And then you also have to log in as well, create an account. So if I actually get my account open on screen as well, just to make sure I'm logged in, because we'll show you something super nice in a second. And it's worth just showing you this because it works so nicely. So what we can do is a similar thing. Let's just select all of these, right click and say publish and share web gallery like so. And yes, Peter, it is only Mac only, but PC is coming. So don't worry about that. Prodibi. So now let's call this client gallery. We can do the same thing. For example, we could add a watermark. So let's just do that once more. So we could do the same thing like with job identifier and all that kind of stuff. So we could do exactly those things if we want to. Now, but the cool thing about Prodibi is that it can check the image at 100%. So I'm going to leave JPEG quality around 85 and we're going max 100% like so. We can add some output sharpening for screen, why not? And now all I'm going to do is say publish. And then that will start churning away in the background. As you can see, I don't know if we've got our activity window. It's probably hiding on the second screen somewhere. But anyway, I'm just going to keep an eye on my Prodibi account. Here we go, like so. I can actually share this. There it is. I can share this with you in a second. So if we click on this, I'm going to make that public. Let's copy that. Make a new, I'll do a new, oops, where's Chrome gone? Let's do a new incognito window. Open this up. And here's a super awesome gallery. I'm going to post it in the audience as well. So the nice thing about this, let's just make this monitor a bit bigger, is when I go into one image, see down here it says 25%. So I can go up 50%, 100%. Camilla's going to hate me for this, but there we go. So it allows you to have a really nice web gallery, but also browse at full resolution, which is really nice. And if we go back to the overview page, you can see it like so. And we could have that watermark and all that stuff as well. So in the chat window, you can have a little browse around with that yourself as well. So it's just a really nice plugin that you can play around with, definitely. Let's move that back out the way and close this down. And they also have, which I didn't show, they have a proofing gallery. So that will show a similar gallery to what you guys can see, but you can also tick on the images you like and sync it back to Capture One, which is kind of super nice as well. Lisa was asking about sequencing. Where was it? Number sequencing. Yes. So if you wanted to, this is under output naming. So under output naming, if I click on the box here, again, it works with tokens. So if you didn't want to have image name, let's do something different. Again, we could have job identifier, like so, and then that will pick that up. And then we could have recipe format. And then we could also use a counter. See, 1-digit counter. 1 digit won't give us many shots, so let's change that to 3. So now we've got job identifier, recipe format, and a counter, like so. Probably 4 would be a bit more realistic. And we say OK. So that all, let's just not process everything out once more. So now that's going to go into my pictures folder. Let's just clear out pictures. Like so. So let's hit this processing again. Process. So now we've got it numbered like this. Who is that asking? Lisa. Now if you want to change the counter, so if you look in output naming, the little 3 dots, click on that, reset output counter, set the output counter, as in you want it to start at number 20 or whatever. And then also the increment. So does it count up in 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, and so on. So the important thing to take away there is that you use the digit counter, and then the submenu of output naming, come out of that. That's where you can set the different counters. Can you change location of watermarks in a set of photos so that the notification doesn't obscure the eyes? No, it's all scaled. So so in the Dropbox option here, this is another thing that often comes up. It says, there's metadata all over my images. How do I get rid of it? It's because you have the particular recipe highlighted. So if I go to output to A3 size, then it goes. Then if I'm highlighting this recipe, it basically simulates what the recipe does. But they will be in the same position. So no, you can't manually change it for each one, I'm afraid. Cool. I think that brings us up nicely to the end. I mean, there is more you can do with the process recipes and so on, or tokens, I should say. So in the Dropbox example, for example, all we had was job identifier. But you notice here I did some color tagging. So if I start typing color tag, I can also have a color tag, and a sneaky little thing you can do in between the tokens. If you put a // that will create another folder level down. So if we go to my Dropbox for a second, let's just empty this, delete that, delete. So we're just going to run this process recipe once more. Let's select all the pictures and say process. So now we've got job identifier, first one, and then the second is a folder based on the color tag. And you can do star ratings and so on and so forth. So if you want to divide up your outputs even more, you can do color tag, star rating, any metadata term you can think of. Loads of really simple stuff for export. With process recipes, I'm not sure if you're talking about the raw files, Andreas. How can I reduce the size of the files in order to save space on hard drives? Buy more hard drives. That's probably the easiest thing to do. I mean, for export, that depends. JPEGs, PNG all reduce file size. But if you're talking about raw files, there's nothing much you can do about that, unfortunately. Do you use different calibrations for your monitor? No, never. So this actually came up this morning, that should I put my monitor profile in here? No, definitely not. Capture One is using your monitor profile at system level to calculate how the colors look based on your output profile. So a monitor is not an output profile, it's a device profile. So you would never, ever, ever put your monitor profile here, and you would never have different profiles for different mediums. You could argue you might have one for printing set at D50 compared to web at another one, but I think that's probably overcomplicating it. So I wouldn't, for example. What's the last batch tab here? Good question. Let's just process this again. So that shows you the images that are currently in the queue. Sorry, that was a bit quick. Let's do something that might be a bit slower. Full size TIFF. So let's process these again. Process. So that's currently what's being processed. Actually still pretty quick on this machine. So if you want to stop the queue, you can say stop by hitting the button at the bottom. And then start the queue again, stop. And then if you think, actually, I don't want to process that or this one, you can highlight it and hit the backspace key like so. So that allows you to manage, especially if you set a queue going of 800 pictures. It's like, no, I did it wrong. Then you can just go into batch, hit stop and clear them out. I think, is there a shortcut here? Clear queue. So that will actually whack everything out as well. And the history shows you what you've processed out to. Sam says, reminder tip at the end. I've forgotten what I was going to say. So if you can remember, Sam, let me know. Would you ever print an image directly from the raw file and not exporting to a TIFF? You can. There's no reason why you can't print from Capture One. And you can go into the print dialog and resize and all that kind of stuff. So there's no reason why you couldn't do that. And plenty of people do as well. Can you soft proof CMYK? Perry was saying, yes, if you have the CMYK profile, say show all. So if the CMYK profile is on your system, then there's no reason why you could then pick it. So if we pick something like Fogra one, and then basically you see now how the black has lost it a bit. So if we go to JPEG, black's darker, and then we're simulating or soft proofing basically the ICC profile. So if you have an ICC profile, then you can load it here and then you can get not basically a perfect idea, but a closer idea. Because remember, you're looking at transmissive light on the monitor and the book or print is reflective light. So it's, of course, slightly different. I think that was it. Oh, yes. How would you copy process recipes elsewhere? So go to your, I think that was it. Go to your Finder. We'll cover PC in a second. Go menu, hold the Alt key down. Ta-da, library pops up. So that's with the Alt key. And then you've got application support, Capture One, and you'll find, recipes. So that shows you all the various different process recipes, and you can just duplicate them and copy them across. In a PC, it's on the C drive, your username, and then app data, Capture One. So C drive, username, app data, Capture One, and you'll find all these various different folders as well. Can you copy a recipe? Yeah, you can say, it's here, duplicate recipe. So if you just want to tweak it slightly, 3 dots here, duplicate recipe. Alrighty, so next week is simple editing wow result. So that's basically not having to use every single tool in Capture One to get a nice result. So if you're newer to Capture One, that could be a good one for you to watch as well. So covering some of the basic techniques, but just as powerful and just as useful. And also, you might find over the next month or so that you might get an invite to via a different webinar service. Those of you who've watched over the past, 3 to 4 months have noticed some like screen redraw issues with GoToWebinar sound dropouts, as a couple of you had today. So to mitigate that, obviously I've tried lots of things with GoToWebinar, but it looks like that will probably never improve. So one of the systems I've been trying out is Webinar Ninja, great name. So you might find over the next month that one of the webinars is going to be broadcast on this. So if you see a different sign up page and so on, you're not being spammed by someone who isn't Phase 1 or Capture 1. It's just a different medium to try out. So far looks really promising and super awesome. Has a group chat room so you can heckle each other and me and so on. And loads of other nice features which should give you a much better and more interesting experience. So don't be alarmed if some of the sign up pages or one or two look different over the next few months. So many thanks for your time today. I hope that was useful. Look out for a follow-up email tomorrow sometime, and you'll be able to watch the recording at your leisure. So many thanks again, and take care, and see you all soon. Goodbye.